Right after Cervidra's upgrade to Phynon, Castorice HQ spared no time when it came to a fresh cook right off the shelf with Evernight, whose kit functions perfectly with her sub DPS and support capabilities while substantially improving Castorice's new buff generation. Moreover, she shows impressive personal damage numbers both as a sub DPS and even as a main DPS for a new member in our Tricycle archetype. The main question you're probably wondering is who will be Evernight replacing in our current Castorice team, namely RMC or Tribi, as well as her future prospects as we ramp up into Cyrene as well as version 4. Jumping straight into the summary of Evernight, she is basically a Remembrance sub DPS pseudo support, a little bit similar to how Anexa felt during his launch as an Erudition sub DPS support. Evernight has solid personal damage due to her insane number of personal crit damage and damage buffs, on top of a 30% vulnerability debuff, while also having the added utility of very fast new buff generation with Castorice. Realistically speaking, her main appearance will primarily be with Castorice, while having some potential as a standalone DPS running the Tricycle team as of now. We'll explore what she has to offer in these two areas and discuss the potential prospects of what is to come in the future. So jumping into the character kit, for a basic attack you're pretty much never going to use this, so don't have to worry about it. For a skill, you would always want to use her skill, so there isn't too much of an issue on the buff uptime, and the buff is an aura buff on her, so Mimo Sprite summoned after the buff is applied can still be affected by Evernight's crit damage buff. Her summon is very similar to Castorice in the sense where they are not meant to be on field the entire time, unlike Aglaia, RMC, and Hyacinth. As such, most of the time, this skill will not be used to heal, and the HP consumption here will contribute towards Castorice's new buff. Keep in mind, whenever you use a skill, even if the Mimo Sprite is at full HP, you can still generate new buff for Castorice. Her built-in crit damage buff, which is the same 24% scaling as Sparkle skill, is slightly lower than Sunday's 30% crit damage scaling, but keep in mind this buff is only limited to Mimo Sprites and the duration works similar to Rame, Tribi, and Robin. Now during the ultimate state, which will last for 2 enhanced attacks, it will gain 12 stacks, which is usually almost instantly places you at 16 stacks to perform the enhanced attack for EV. Now jumping into the ultimate, this is going to be a 240 energy cost with very decent AoE damage, 30% vulnerability with an additional personal 60% damage buff. On top of this, you are going to be immune to all crowd control, which is a very nice quality of life considering Hyacinth cannot immediately dispel all the crowd controls. Darker's Riddle is an enhanced state that is fixed on the number of times EV moves, which is 2 times in total. Now ideally, I would want to wait for this ultimate state to activate first in order to have the 30% vulnerability, which stacks on very nicely with Tribi's ultimate for a 60% total damage vulnerability. Now as a Castorice sub DPS, you do want to use this ultimate to summon EV, so only do it when EV is not on the field. Also, the 30% vulnerability is only removed when her next turn begins, so it is worth keeping in mind since the energy cost is quite high at 240, and especially if you do not have her signature light cone to assist with her. Now, when you do hit the 16 plus stacks and you take an immediate action, I'll intentionally want to delay this ultimate a little bit even if I had enough energy to let Evie die, because then using the ultimate to summon Evie back immediately will apply the 30 damage vulnerability buff while still giving us a very good amount of new buff generation. However, as a main DPS, I would just use the ultimate as fast as possible to squeeze in the highest possible damage within the action values, as well as helping her charge the ultimate a little bit faster. Then jumping into the talent, the key thing for this is that you want to use this to stack Memoria, which is whenever Evernight or EV loses HP once per target per attack. Now this would include effects like enemy attacks, Castorice skill, Hyacinth light cone, etc. And the more often you lose HP, the faster you bring up EV to kill it and in turn give Castorice more new buff. Now it is possible to hit 60 Memoria instantly at the start of combat, but do know that although she will take action immediately, this effect can only trigger again after the enhanced Mimo Sprite attack, which means it is possible to stack on Memoria higher than 16, similar to Saber's charge mechanic where there is no ceiling. That being said, it isn't as ideal for Castorice's new buff generation because you actually want Eevee to die as frequently as possible for the highest amount of new buff, but it is still very fun to see goofy R damage numbers for a 40 stack Evernight Blast, and this will be way more relevant in the role as a main DPS. And then for a technique, you pretty much just use it for team-wide Mimo Sprite crit damage buff, which is the exact same with your skill as well as +1 Memoria. Then quickly talking about her Mimo Sprite Eevee itself, it is basically split into the skill and the talent, but majority of the focus will be on the skill because her her skill is going to be Evernight's main gimmick from both a damage as well as a new buff generation perspective. This splits into both basic and enhanced attack, with the latter activating at 16 or above Memoria points and Evernight not being crowd controlled. The basic skill can just be viewed as a normal basic attack which gains 10% multiplier for every 4 Memoria and giving 1 Memoria itself. Now the enhanced skill multiplier actually goes up drastically from 10% with every 4 to 12% for the main target and 6% for all others for every 1 Memoria. So at 16 stacks, this will be a minimum 192% multiplier plus 72% to all target. This is also a full-on AoE attack with extra damage on the primary target that you were to choose, which is very nice against bosses with summons, similar to D. Herda's enhanced skill. Now, while we know that the lost HP upon death contributes towards Castorice's new buff generation, but we can also see from this clip over here her normal skill, enhanced EV skill, and her trace Dark the Night all combines together, especially with a higher scene team-wide HP increase to give Castorice a massive 30% new buff generation from a single rotation. Her personal damage at 36 stats was also over 500,000 against 2 targets, especially when combined with Tribe's vulnerability and res pen buffs. Now with this number going even higher, especially if you have more Memoria stacks or you just have the E1 Tribe. And then for the Mimo Sprite talent, honestly, there's nothing too crazy. It's basically a personal damage increase by 50%, instant action when you summon, and increases Evernight speed by either 10% or up to 40% if you use it during the enhanced skill. Nothing too in-depth about this, and the potential 40% speed buff only lasts until the start of her next turn. Now for major tracers, you have a built-in 35% crit rate, so 65% is a good stopping point for Evernight, easily achieved with an 18.7% crit rate trace. Also, every single time you consume 5% of her own HP to increase new buff generation and her own crit damage, while giving 1 skill point after every enhanced Mimo Sprite skill for even faster rotations and skill spam on higher scene. For the next trait, 70 energy and 1 Memoria can allow for an instant ultimate at the start of her turn, applying the 30% vulnerability and increasing new buff generation for Castorice. This trait also allows for her ultimate to be much faster despite being a 240 energy cost, with every 5 energy and 1 Memoria gain per ally Mimo Sprite, meaning RMC will technically cycle her faster than Tribe at the expense of Tribe's buffs. And lastly, up to a 65% crit damage increase for all Mimo Sprites. Now I personally don't find this to be that big of a difference in terms of damage between the 15% crit damage and Tribe's amplification choosing to use RMC. They are roughly the same for Castorice, but Tribe can boost both higher scene and Evernight's damage. And then for the minor tracers, it's very nice at the 18.7% crit rate, 80% HP, as well as 13.3% crit damage. Skill leveling, outscale Mimo talent, as well as her basic. Now jumping to the signature Lycone, for this comparison, S1 does offer a more than 20% damage increase for both herself as well as Castorice, and this is notable with the 20% defense ignore, especially if Castorice has her own S1 to further amplify the defense down. On top of that, the 30% damage increase for Evernight itself, despite not having defense down, is a very nice damage multiplier increase. The 8 energy is also extremely comfortable, translating to roughly 24 energy based on a 3-turn rotation when I use Tribe. Now other than the story S5, you could also run a duplicate higher scene Lycone, since the HP consumption can work especially if you're an unreadable player, although the damage taken effect will not stack. The Battle Pass S5 as well as Herda Store are also decent alternatives for crit damage buff as well as speed respectively. Generally speaking, her Lycone will scale very well the closer you reach to 100% defense ignore for DPS, and due to a lack of close substitutes, unless you run higher scene S1, this is a very nice pickup. Then going into the Relics, the 4-piece world is built perfectly for Evernight, increasing a whopping 24% max HP, but unfortunately you do need a Mimo Sprite, so it's a pretty sad day for Blade and Mighty. Also, this gains 15% for all allies damage buff, perfect to increase Tribe's and higher scenes damage. For the 2-piece, a bone is gonna be the standard HP set, so nothing too crazy over here, but we might be worth considering the brand new Arcadia, which is the final set, because it can give her a 36% damage boost if there are 4 Mimo Sprites on the field. Unfortunately, Castorice Dragon wouldn't be on the field all the time, and with our best teams currently running Tribe, Bone is the ideal option for now because Bone also gives you crit damage and her team buff scales on crit damage. This, however, can change with Cyrene as a 4-star remembrance for even more 36% damage bonus. And for our main sets, crit damage body, speed boots, ice damage sphere, HP rope, as well as either speed or HP percentage subsets. For the speed boots and crit damage body, they were self-explanatory with a massive built-in crit rate which easily allows us to hit the 100% crit rate in battle. For your ice damage versus HP percentage comparison, I did find a roughly 5.3% more damage running the ice damage sphere, so take that into consideration despite having worse crit ratios for ice damage. I also found myself not relying on the ER rope and still having a very consistent 3-turn ultimate, which then allow me to further amplify our own HP that translates into more new buff for Castorice. Now keep in mind, 3-turn ultimate rotation is extremely important because the enhanced state lasts for 2 attacks and ends on Evernight's next turn. So by her 3rd turn, she has to get her ultimate ready to go to be able to get 100% coverage for the 30% vulnerability. Now as I've mentioned previously, I also potentially hold Evernight's ultimate just to let Eevee die as frequently as possible for more Castorice stacks. The ice damage was gonna be a little bit better at the expense of slightly lower new buff, but I would say this was worth it because the new buff drop was so little. Unless you have a 99% Castorice new buff scenario, then feel free to change the HP to percentage spear. Then jumping into the Eidolons, she has an extremely strong E1 as well as E2 for main DPS Evernight and a very big E6. This E1 in my opinion is going to be game changing, especially if you are a Castorice main. At worst, this is a 20% base multiplier buff to all Mimo sprites, and at best it's a 50% multiplier buff. Now keep in mind, this is only for Mimo sprites, which brings us to the topic where because it is a multiplier buff increase, this is one of the highest damage increase in the game, even more so than Respan and vulnerability. Now for Castorice mains, this damage increase can also be absurd in all of our endgame content, be it area of effect or single target, and it helps a lot with Castorice's weaker single target rotation. For herself, the base multipliers are a little bit too low to enjoy the full benefits, while Ika and Mimi can gain a little bit more damage output, but ultimately at the end of the day, you should only consider this if you are going to be running Castorice as your main DPS. So unless you are absolutely locked in for Castorice, E1 will pretty much be completely useless for all of our other DPS other than raising her own damage and Ika's damage in the tricycle team, so it's a very all-nothing team comp, Mimo sprite or no Mimo sprite. Then going into Eidolon 2, this is almost a game changing, and I personally feel this would be game changing if it was just E1, which would make this one of the strongest E1 in the entire game, because this combines both charge speed as well as a damage increase. The 40% more crit damage means more crit damage for the rest of the Mimo sprites, and it also leads to a much faster charge for Castorice, as well as stacking her personal damage to increase the multipliers of her EV and Hunt skill. This E2 is also really strong for main DPS Evernight, where her personal damage from E2 goes up by more than 50% with an additional 2 Darker Zero state, meaning 40 Memoria instead of 20 for 1 ultimate use, essentially full coverage of the 30% vulnerability, often leading to access and translates into way more higher damage numbers for Evernight. Then going on to E4, break efficiency is pretty good, especially in Epoch Shadows, but it might be counterintuitive if you want enemies to hit your HP scaling team for more stacks. And then lastly, E6, first of all, this is one of the coolest E6R I've seen in the entirety of HSR. Second of all, classic Respan as well as a 30% Memoria refund, which is very similar to Castorice's 30% new butt refund from the E2. This fits perfectly with Evernight's E2 for almost infinite EV and Hunt skill spams every single time. So at the end of the day, between E1 and S1, I would say they are both excellent vertical investments. E1 is a very high damage increase, while S1 has no close substitutes unless you have a spare Hyacinth Lycone. Now they are both at the end of the day damage increase. I personally go for the E1, especially for the Castorice owners, to have the highest damage amplification while using either the Story, Battle Pass or Horror-Storm Lycone in the meantime. Now jumping into the team comps, I will focus this early access guide to 3 main teams, which are the Castorice running the RMC variant, the Tribi variant, as well as lastly Evernight as a main DPS herself. Now everything was done in E0 as one, with Tribi running E0 DDD, full auto for both first half and second half of the current Memory of Chaos. Stay tuned for the live server to test even more different team comps. Now between these 3 teams, I would say Tribi is the highest possible damage as of now, with the built-in synergy for all 3 units being HP scaling and having AoE attacks on top of buffs and debuffs that helps the entire team. RMC will be slightly behind since her buffs are only mainly for Castorice, right? Because you can only buff a single target with Mimi. Now above all, Tribi can use the God of all Lycones, done, saving you more action value for all endgame content as well, on top of all the different buffs you're providing. Now the charge time for Memoria will be slightly slower for Tribi compared to RMC, but generally speaking it is not that big of a difference since we are stacking on bigger damage numbers and more suitable for AoE content like Pure Vision and MOC bosses like Lygus. This will also likely be the best team for the upcoming Anomaly Arbitration featuring Lygus as the finals boss, so for the brand new endgame content, stay tuned for another video for that. Now while this may be in the best in store, I would say RMC does not fall too far behind. In fact, they are very close. Although unfortunately, you definitely need to use manual play to time RMC's skill and ultimate usage such that Castorice does not waste her actions during Pollock's uptime, which would be a direct loss of new buff generation and overall overall damage decrease. There was this one time in the main DPS Evernight where I literally had to pause because I could not bear to see AI wasting a 40% RMC charge from a wasted ultimate. Now, a very important thing to note that between both Tribute and RMC, it's very similar to how Fuke replaced HMC. So this means Cyrene might or might not replace the RMC in that slot, and if that is going to be the situation, then we have to wait and see if Tribute can stay in competition with Cyrene or if Evernight can stay in competition with Tribute. Finally, for Evernight as a main DPS, it was surprisingly comparable to Castorice herself, just barely missing the 0 cycle for the first half considering Japot is literally 40% ice rest and getting 1 cycle on Lygos with some very satisfying damage numbers when hit at 64 stacks Memoria for more than 3 million damage. This team has also some very strong potentials for vertical investments in either Evernight, Tribute, or Hyacinth Eidolons. Now, this current archetype once again reminded me of the D Herda and the Nexa team building where you take out a Nexus to stand alone with Sunday Robin for some 魔术技巧, right? And as of now, Evernight main DPS is not going to be the best performing HP Mimo DPS, especially if you want to compare it to Castorice, but this might change once again if Cyrene were to change the entire history of Remembrance as a whole. And for our last segment, this is going to be talking about our endgame performance. I will be discussing using the Tribute variant because I feel they have the highest synergy as well as performance as of now. Should you want to use Tribute for other teams, for example, D Herda and My Day, kindly swap this slot into RMC instead because like I mentioned, the difference is not that big. You just really have to time your manual to play for the charge timings for Castorice to generate her new butt. On the other hand, Final is very chill without Tribute, and a lot of the other DPSs, even if you do not have Tribute, is probably not going to be the end of the world, right? So these are going to be the finals over here, and I first want to preface that this particular team where Castorice, Evernight, Tribute, and Hyacinth ran together, it was really auto-friendly, just like Firefly back in the days where there's barely anything to min-max and optimize except for the occasional wasted new buff from Hyacinth and Evernight ultimates. As such, they are a very casual friendly team. Slap them and go, they're pretty much gonna do everything for you. So for Memory of Chaos, I didn't really face a lot of energy issues while on HP roll, and Lygos was a free ultimate machine that allowed almost infinite ultimate spams and having absurd Memoria stacks with Evernight to deal with the summons for Lygos. The Hyacinth S1 does have a lot of value here, which helps for the last few percent of new butt should you fail to get the Castorice ultimate. Now do note that the HP loss of a 16 or 6T stack Memoria EV is gonna be the exact same number of new butt for Castorice. So with this setup, every single time EV is gonna be dying, that will be translating to roughly 14% new butt, even if your stacks are higher. Now ideally, more EVs to help with Castorice is gonna be more important than Evernight's personal damage, but if the boss mechanics like Lygos helps us to generate more energy and ultimates in return, then it really doesn't matter that much. We will save the brand new MOC for another video. First of all, I really a little bit mongas for this boss. It reminds me of like this Elden Ring boss, it is what it is, but for using the Evernight and Castorice for Flame Weaver in the next MOC would be more ideal. And then jumping into Pure Vision, I would say this is truly exceptional performance, and honestly there's not much to be said. Even right now, Castorice is standing as the strongest Pure Vision team period with Hyacinth and Tribute, and Evernight just further cements that position by swapping out RMC for even more new butt as well as additional area of effect damage. The targeting for Evernight is also one main with all others AoE target, which is perfect for wave 2 and wave 3, very similar to D Herda skill, right? So Pure Vision, not too much to say, absolutely exceptional. And then lastly for Epoch Shadows, ironically the 40% Ice Red Cocolia had a slightly better performance than Pollux, although they are both very similar. The toughness breaking was very fast and Japar died from the splash damage over time, while all of the other different pillars collapsed very quickly from the amount of AoE we have. Unfortunately, if Castorice was to get frozen, we will lose a lot of value because no Pollux can be summoned and hence no new buff generation from the rest of our team unless we get off a Hyacinth skill and Hyacinth ultimate. The Pollux Epoch is going to be the exact same as our previous Memory of Chaos. The boss is specifically designed to shield for the HP environment, so not too much to discuss over here. If you're going to be using Castorice, you're pretty much going to be having a walk in the park. So overall, definitely going to be charging new butt a lot faster for Castorice when combined with DDD, leading to a very fast clear for Epoch Shadows. And with that, we have come to the end of Evernight's early access review. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. I really am looking forward to see how her synergy is gonna be like with Castorice, as well as a standalone as a main DPS. But at the end of the day, above everything, we do know that Cyrene is coming on version 3.7, and unfortunately, I don't really know what she does all the way until her early access is gonna be coming out. So let me know what you guys think below. Word of the day is gonna be Jellyfish. Join Twitch, join Discord, join all the best. I got your pools. Use code over there. Myself, game. I'll see you guys next time. Take care.